Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's another Sunday evening, and we'd like to welcome each and every one of us to another evening of lectures. My name is Adeshola. I will be your moderator for this evening's session. Please just remember our house rules that once you come in, please place your name in the chat box and the political party you represent in the college. We would be taking the facilitation by our facilitators, both of them today, after which questions will be taken after they are done. Today we'll be having two interesting personalities. I'm sure we have gone through the outline that has been sent or that was sent earlier by the admins. Today we'll be looking at climate change and governance, climate change and governance. And today we have two individuals. We have a lady and a young man who would take us on this journey. But first, as they always say, I will start the introduction and reading of their brief profile. And I'll start with the lady first in our midst. Her name is Onyekachi Chukwu, and she is an associate in the Environment and Climate Action Department at the Clean Technology Hub Nigeria. She coordinates the Hub's volunteer communities in their efforts to promote clean energy adoption for increased energy access and climate resilience across Africa. She is a sustainability and development enthusiast with a successful record in project implementation, including sustainability campaigns, climate change advocacy, school sensitization programs, and stakeholder engagements. In addition, she has a keen interest in designing solution labs where individuals and professionals with similar interests brainstorm and develop ideas for the best solutions to social and environmental changes. Onyekachi is an alumnus of the Power Africa Nigeria Power Sector Programs. Let me take that again. Onyekachi is an alumnus of the Power Africa Nigeria Power Sector Programs Women's Leadership Development course, the African Women in Energy Development Initiative, AWEDI, Networks Peer Mentoring Circle, and the Women in Clean Cooking Mentorship Program of the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, GWNET. So she is an alumnus of all these institutional bodies. She is undergoing a Climate Action Accelerator program by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. She is a graduate of Political Science from the Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. So we bid Onyekachi welcome. I see that she's already here with us.
Hi,
Hi, Onyekachi. Yes, you're welcome. And then I'd like to introduce Samuel Ajala, who is our second facilitator this evening, who works with the Clean Technology Hub as a research associate and leads the circular economy portfolio. He's also a data and development journalist covering climate change, energy transition, and water, sanitation, and hygiene, WASH, in Nigeria. Working as a freelance contributor to the Energy Wend blog, an outlet based at the European Union office in Heinrich-Böll Stiftung in Germany, and Gasserluck based in the Netherlands. I really hope I got these names correctly. In 2022, Samuel was selected as the only Nigerian in-person media fellow to attend the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, BETD. He is a fellow for the Future News Worldwide, FNW, 2022 digital conference organized by the British Council to bring together the best 100 young journalists worldwide. His bylines include Data Fight, Foresight Climate and Energy FCE, Climate Home News, Adweek, Premium Times, The Cable, Hum Angle, and the News Digest Nigeria. Okay, So, Mr. Samuel Ajala, you're welcome, welcome, welcome. You can say hello to the house if you're in
Hello,
here.
thank you
Okay,
for having
hi.
me.
Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so the class will start in earnest. We have our facility, the cohort members here already, so I will just hand over the virtual lecture to you and you can take us away. Over to you, sirs. Anyakachi, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Adeshola, for the introduction. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much. So before I start, I would like to do a pre-survey to understand my participants' knowledge of climate change. So I would like to throw a question to the participants. So you don't need to unmute to answer this. You can easily type on the chat box. You can just put a thumbs up if your answer is on the affirmative. So the first question is, have you heard about climate change? So just put on the chat box a thumbs up. Okay, I can see one person, two. All right, great. So we are 36, 3, 4. Wow, okay, perfect. Okay. So my second question, still with the same thumbs up. I'd like to know how many of you here have heard about Ayetoro community in Ondo State and the current environmental challenges that they are facing. So thumbs up. Nobody? Okay, perfect. So the third question and the last one will be, how many of you remember the floodings that happened last year that affected about 33 states in the nation? Thumbs up. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing so much thumbs up. I'm really surprised because this was a nationwide challenge and I was assuming that everybody would have learned about it, and knowing that, okay, the people that we are dealing with today, so it's like a nationwide challenge that everybody should have known about. But thank you so much for partaking in this little exercise. So it's good for you to actually know that this flooding affected 33 states across the nation, with over 2 million people that were affected generally. And then we had about 1.4 million people displaced and over 600 people were killed and about 2,400 injured, with accounting to 372 deaths as a result of this flooding. So I know it's very bad. This is a very bad statistics. And also, the flooding also led to the destructions of so much infrastructures. You had schools being swept out. You had hospitals being destroyed. You have homes being destroyed as well, and people being displaced. So these were some of the issues that the flooding caused, as well as people's means of livelihood being destroyed. And then going back to my second question about Ayetoro. So this is a community in the coastal regions of Ogun State. And currently they are undergoing, the community is being submerged by flooding, as so many homes, and you see ancestral homes being swept away by flooding. And all these challenges are a result of climate change. So my job at Cleantech Hub actually entails, part of my job entails raising awareness and helping people and communities to build resilience against the impacts of climate change, and also pushing for governments and policymakers to join in on combating climate change issues. And so that is what we do in my department, Environment and Climate Action Department at Clean Technology Hub. So moving on, sorry, Adeshola, I think I shared the slide with you. Would you want to project that? So this is just a brief premise to just show you some facts
okay, I think
showing the impacts of climate change.
One of the admins will help moderate, would help project this.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So as I wait for them to project my slide. So these are some of like the data or the instances that we see as a result of climate change, some of the impacts of climate change in our communities. So it's not like when they say climate change, you'll be thinking, okay, it's an abstract something that is not something you see, but then you can actually see that climate change is real. It's happening in our everyday life. You've noticed the floodings, you've noticed the death rate, you've noticed the demolition and like demolition of infrastructures and the rest. So these are some of the issues we are facing when we talk about climate change. Okay. So during the course of this class, so at the end of this class, like I was hoping that we'll be able to understand what climate change is. Then you also understand what the environment is, because you need to understand the environment before you start talking about climate change. Then you also understand the causes of climate change, the effects of climate change, and also we'll delve into the main thing for today, which is climate change and governance. But before we go on, it's very pertinent that you understand some simple terminologies why talking about climate change. These are simple terms in climate change. So when we're having the discussion climate change, there are some terms that always spring up. So it's important that you understand some of these terms. The first one is global warming. So the experience now, if you notice now, the weather is very, very hot. Like I know when I go out most times, like I always sweat. Like it hasn't been this hot in a very long time. And then there have been discussions online where people will be saying, okay, Abuja is hotter than Lagos, or Lagos is hotter than Abuja. You have that kind of discussions and all that. So people are really noticing that the weather is getting hot. And I'm sure that a lot of people don't really know why this is happening. Why is this occurring at this moment? So global warming simply means the long-term warming of the planet over a period of time. So the Earth is warming, and the weather is getting hotter and hotter. And this is as a result of human activities. So I'm going to be listing out the human activities as we go further. And then we have greenhouse gases. So some of us that science students, you might not even be science students. I wasn't a science student actually. So I majored in political science, but then at least I know I've heard about greenhouse gases. So basically these are gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. So you have carbon dioxide, you have water vapor, you have, there are so many greenhouse gases out there that trap heat into the atmosphere and then warm up or heat up the planet. So what they do is that when they trap this heat, the heat cannot escape. Rather, it just circulates and then warm up the earth and leads to global warming. So what causes these greenhouse gases? Naturally, the earth emits some greenhouse gases, but to a little extent, it emits just little greenhouse gases in such a way that it should be able to like warm the earth and enable plants to grow, enable us to live in a conducive environment. But then when these greenhouse gases become in excess, that's when the problem, the challenges arises. And so human activities such as flaring of gases, during maybe when you're when you're drilling oil and all that. So such human activities bring out all these gases, and then they go up to the atmosphere and trap heat and make the earth warmer and warmer. And then we also have climate change mitigation. So this simply means reducing the emission of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So to prevent the planet from warming or to become extremely hot, like we need to reduce the emissions of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that is where climate mitigation comes into place. For example, instead of you using fossil fuel to generate energy, you could easily use renewable energy sources like solar to generate energy. So you use alternatives that are environmentally friendly. So these are just examples of mitigating greenhouse gas emission. Then you also have climate change adaptation. It refers to the action of reducing the negative impacts of climate change. For example, Ayotoro community, they are currently facing a very huge challenge now. So you don't expect them to leave their ancestral home and run away because they don't have any other home. So what can they do? They'll try to adapt to the situation. So how do they adapt to this situation? Maybe by building houses that could withstand the storms or the floodings that are coming in from the ocean and all that. So there are different ways to mitigate this climate change impacts. So basically, climate change adaptation means the problem is here. How do we solve it? How do we adapt to it? How do we live with this problem and be resilient? Then that brings us to climate justice. So this entails ensuring representation, inclusion, and protection of the rights of those most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So basically, it's talking about, for example, you have third world countries or developing countries that the impact of climate change is really severe there. Like they have so many disasters. And so what climate justice is trying to do is that it encourages the developed nations, the nations that are already industrialized, developed enough, to help these developing nations to be able to adapt and mitigate to climate change effects. And then moving on, we have the Paris Agreement. So basically, this is a legally binding treaty on climate change. So the Paris Agreement was, has about 196 parties. So when we say parties, we mean countries that signed this agreement. So they agreed that they are going to work towards the reduction of carbon emission on a particular date. So they are targeting 2030. By then, they'll reduce the carbon emission to a percentage. So that is what the Paris Agreement is all about. So it's a legal binding document that was signed by 196 parties, that is countries, to reduce their carbon emission and reduce the global average temperature. So this Paris Agreement also enables countries to come up with what is called the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution. So every country, every one of these parties have this nationally determined contribution. And wherein inside this nationally determined contribution, you have ways and strategies and action points on how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And Nigeria has an updated NDC. It was updated in 2021. I'd have to look for it and maybe share it with the team. Then moving on, we have climate finance. So we've talked about all these challenges and what is causing them, what is leading to them and all that. So now we are now talking about, okay, how can we mitigate these challenges? How can we adapt to these challenges? And that is where finance comes into play. Remember I said that developed nations were tasked to help developing nations to be able to carry out climate actions. And so this climate finance is gotten from developed nations, also international bodies. You also have private institutions that are willing to fund some of these climate mitigation and adaptation actions. Then moving on, we also have the Conference of Parties. So it's basically a body that is responsible for bringing together all the countries that signed the Paris Agreement, bringing together and like holding them responsible. Okay, you decided you wanted to sign this agreement, and then you've decided that in come 2030, you're going to reduce your global emission to this percentage. So we are going to hold you accountable. So this Paris Conference of Parties holds annually, where people mesh together, all the countries mesh together, and then discuss their climate change issues, the challenges they are currently facing, and the steps that they are taking to mitigate such challenges. So last year, we had the Conference of Parties. And then the idea was that there will be this, they are going to be helping developing nations to adapt to the whole climate change issues. So that was the conclusion, the consensus at the last year's Conference of Parties. So how we actually refer to this, it is COP, like COP, and last year's COP was COP27, and this year we'll be looking at going for COP28 in Egypt. So basically, the consensus they reached during the last year's COP was to respond to loss and damage that all these subjugated, or let's say vulnerable countries actually faced, which brings us to loss and damage. So these are the consequences of climate change that goes beyond what people can adapt to. So I was talking about adaptation. How can these communities adapt to this effect, these challenges they're already facing? But whereas the case arises that maybe they cannot even adapt, so whatever it is that they've lost is very huge. For example, maybe they've lost an ancestral home. So ancestral home is not something that you could start building again. Like there are some past things that must have been swept away by a flood or whatever. So it's not something that you could really redeem with money. But then the loss and damages is talking about developed nations coming together and discussing with the developing nations on ways in which they could help them to be resilient to the whole climate change impacts. And now we'll be taking a little documentary. It's a documentary, but this is not the main documentary. This is just a snippet of it, but it's been summarized. So it's telling the story of climate change, human activities, and population explosion, and its impacts on Nigeria's environment from the perspective of the communities that are most affected. So we can just take this documentary and then we'll be back shortly. You can please click on the Nowhere to Run. There's a link there.
Hi, Onikachi, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Please click on the link. There's a link there. It's going to just play a mini documentary. Click on Nowhere to Run. Click on Nowhere to Run.
Okay, I'm doing that, but it's not responding.
Okay. All right.
It's not responding.
Okay, so
well, yeah, when this is a PDF.
Yeah, okay. So
yes, I think if it was maybe a PowerPoint.
Okay. All right, that is fine. I'll just do a summary of it. So basically, this Nowhere to Run, a Shehu Musa Yar'Adua Foundation documentary, talks about how coastal communities are faring in terms of climate change impacts. So it's showing some like riverine communities and coastal communities that are being swept off by maybe the sea level rising, and they're sweeping into these communities and destroying a whole lot of things. And then you see the issues of, you also see the issues of mining, where they are mining oil and then it just sweeps into the ocean. The water bodies there, destroying ecosystems, destroying the farmlands and all that, and displacing a whole lot of people, causing all sorts of illnesses and the rest. So it just shows these human activities that are being done that are destroying our environment. It's just creating awareness, just to show you that this is real, this is happening. So if you're able to, you can go online and just go to YouTube and type Nowhere to Run and watch the whole documentary. It's actually a very interesting one. So it will give you an idea of what we are talking about, how human beings are actually contributing to the whole climate change effects we are currently facing. Okay, so moving on. So it's important for you to understand what the environment is. So I might apologize though, like you might think that, okay, this is for primary school or it's just a childish stuff. But then you might be surprised that some people don't really know what the environment is all about, or they don't even, they don't even see it in the way that we see it because we're environmentalists. So basically, the environment is everything that surrounds you. It could be the air you breathe, the water you drink, the home that you live in, the trees and all that. So it's classified into the biotic environment, which are the living things, and then the abiotic environment, which are the non-living things. So why is the environment important? Like I said, the environment is everything around you. It's basically, you are part of the environment. So it's just every single thing around you, everything that makes up your being, everything that makes you to be a human being. So that is your environment. So the environment is important because that is where you basically live. That is where you get your food. That is where you breathe. That is where you get your water and everything. So if the environment is not conducive, that means you cease to exist. Then bringing us to what climate change is. So climate change, climate change, it refers to the long-term changes in weather patterns. So you might say, you might say the weather just changes. This moment is sunny and bright, then the next moment is gloomy and then it's raining. But climate change is like long-term changes over a very long period of time. So it occurs, it could be like 100 years or more. So the climate keeps changing and changing and changing until you start feeling its impacts and its effects. So basically, the climate change we are facing now is as a result of human actions, like human activities has resulted to this climate change we are facing. And it's called anthropogenic climate change. Please, moving on. Next slide, please. Hello?
Yes, we can
Hello,
hear
good
you.
second. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we are looking at the global contributions to climate change, and looking at the pie chart over there, it shows that energy, globally, energy contributes the highest to global carbon emissions. You have 73.2%, followed by agriculture, and then you have industry, and then you have waste. Next slide, please. So this is Africa's contribution to climate change. So you might be surprised to know that Africa actually contributes the least to, is the least contributor to global warming, but then we are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I mean, it's not right, it shouldn't be so, but then it's so. And that is why we need to involve ourselves in the whole climate discussion and also take climate action. So basically, we contribute less than 5% to global greenhouse emissions. Then we'll look at Nigeria's high emitting sectors. You have the first being oil and gas. You know, Nigeria is a country that has abundance of oil and gas, and then followed by agriculture. Then you have transportation, electricity, industry, and residential. Then moving on. Now, we'll be talking about the primary effects of climate change. But, I've already listed most of them, but then I can still explain further. So the first one is the increased temperature. So the increased temperature due to global warming leads to heat waves. And this heat wave is it's just abnormally hot weather, very, very hot weather that we are currently experiencing in some parts of Nigeria. So for weeks now, we've been experiencing it in all different cities. People have been complaining about how hot the weather is and all that. And then we have droughts. Drought is basically an area, like an area of a landmass that lacks water. So it just everywhere is dry. You can see the picture there. It just shows like a desert. So nothing, even the tree there is looking like something that is already dying off. So there's no water there to help the trees to grow. And it's just basically like a dry piece of land. So nothing, you can't yield anything on a drought-infested land. So you have issues of drought in states like Kebbi, Sokoto, Zamfara, Kano, Jigawa, and the rest, northern states in Nigeria. So this is also as a result of reduction in rainfall as a result of climate change. Then we also have the issue of changing rainfall patterns. So changing rainfall patterns have led to a whole lot of issues. You see some areas where you have heavy rainfall, like the rainfall is very, very heavy. And then some areas, there is basically no rainfall at all. So there are disparities in the rainfall patterns in different areas. And then you have the issue of rising sea level that leads to floods. So we have what is called glaciers or ice caps. So what these glaciers do, you can find them in the active areas of the world. So what they do is that they keep the earth cooler. But then as the earth is warming, when global warming takes place and all that, and the earth gets hotter and hotter, what it does is that it melts these ice caps, it melts these glaciers, and then when it melts these glaciers, they expand into the ocean and make the oceans to be bigger. It expands the oceans. And what this also does is that it causes flooding in coastal regions, places land areas that are close to the ocean. It floods the banks and then destroys homes and all that. So you see how it's relating to destruction and all that. So rising sea level leads to floods. That's basically what I'm saying. So I've already given an example of the flooding that was experienced in 33 states of Nigeria, where we had so many casualties and all. Then we also have the issue of desertification. So the desert is fast encroaching. It's just coming into people's homes, destroying different farmlands, like destroying a whole lot of livelihoods, drying up water bodies, and then pushing people to leave their homes and go to other areas. And when this happens, like they get displaced, they can't stay in their homeland. They have to look for alternatives that could help them survive. And when they go to these places, it results to scarce resources. And when there are scarce resources, what happens? It leads to insurgency and the crime rates increases. And then you have issues of farmer-herder clashes. So herders from the north come down to the southeast to look for green areas to feed their herds. And most of the times you see them encroaching into people's farmlands, and you see the farmers and the herders are clashing and fighting and all sorts of conflicts. So these are all interrelated. Then moving on, this primary effect also has like a ripple effect. That is what is known as a secondary effect of climate change. So as a result of drought, as a result of changing rainfall patterns, as a result of desert encroachment, you have issues of food insecurity. And also, so many people are displaced or forced to migrate. Like for example, the flooding affected so many parts of the country and then displaced a whole lot of people. You had over 2 million people that were affected by the flooding. You had 1.4 million people displaced and over 600 people were killed, with over 2,400 people being injured and sometimes deaths as well. And this is basically sort of like a repetition as well. So due to the scarce resources as a result of climate change, you see competition rises the limited natural resources. People are competing for limited natural resources. And when that happens, what happens? There's conflict. Everybody starts fighting, there's insecurity emerges and all that. And then you also have the issues of health challenges. So there was this issue of cholera outbreak in northeast Nigeria that's attributed to the contamination of water sources by flooding. So the flooding just came and destroyed the fresh water sources. And then it led to cholera outbreak. So this outbreak killed at least 64 people. And also you have issues of heat waves that causes meningitis. I remember then some years ago, I think 2015 or thereabouts, when we are taking vaccine for meningitis, there are so many cases of meningitis in the north, and this was because the weather was so hot. And there are also cases of people dying as a result of meningitis. And then we also have loss of biodiversity. So this impacts, all these primary impacts actually leads to the loss of that biodiversity. It destroys lands, it leads to land degradation, it leads to erosions and the rest. So it destroys a whole lot of biodiversity. And then moving on, we'll be looking at the nexus between climate change and governance. So now we are going to do a little exercise before we move on. If you have your phone, okay, obviously you have your phone with you. Can somebody just type, go on Google and type, what are the top 5 problems in the world? What are the top 5 problems in the world? You can share on the chat, or if you want to unmute, please do so. Just search for the top 5 problems in the world. Okay, so I'm still waiting. Anybody that would like to share, please unmute and share, or you could put it on the chat.
I think a lot of responses are in the chat box. Do you want me to read them out for you?
Let me see. Sorry. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I can see hunger, 5, global health. Okay. Overpopulation. Okay, I can see poverty, climate change, pollution, loss of biodiversity, conflict. Great. All right, 2 more. Pollution, wars, conflict. Okay. Food security. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for sharing. So the main thing I wanted to highlight, you could see, if you check the top 5, amongst that 5, you see climate change. And from what I've listed here, you have post-COVID recovery, security, food security, technology, climate change. All of these are all challenges you could see inside climate change, because you've seen how insecurity arises as a result of climate change. You've seen how food security insecurity has arise as a result of climate change. You've seen how people can adapt to climate change impacts through the use of technology and all that. So these are all like within that climate change. So it's trying to tell you that climate change is a very big issue. It's a very big global issue that we need to act fast, and we need to act now. Please, the next slide. Okay, so government conducts policies, actions, and affairs of a state. And governance affects all sectors, and it's very important that seeing that government affects all sectors, it's also important that governments come into climate change discussions and also work with organizations to take climate action. So climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's also a governance issue. And here I said a changing climate affects different aspects of human endeavors, or so many aspects of human endeavors. Climate change affects our health, it affects the security, it affects transportation, housing, migration, infrastructure, and the rest. It also affects the vulnerable group, which is made up of women, people living with disability, and children as well. Okay, so Abib is saying environmental factor is a major calamity, air pollution. Thank you so much. So climate change, wars and military conflict, water contamination, human rights violation. Okay, perfect. Pollution, food security. All right, thank you very much for sharing. These are all very important. And now we'll be looking at how climate change affects different government sectors. So we'll look at how climate change affects the food system. So according to the President of All Farmers Association of Nigeria, the 2022 floods remains the worst Nigeria experienced in the last 10 years, with over 500,000 hectares of farmlands were estimated to be destroyed. And then 90% of farmers depend on unirrigated plots, hence food dependence on rain-fed agriculture, forcing seasonal farming. So the changing patterns in rainfall has caused farmers to, they don't really know when to start farming, or when, like they don't know the patterns to use anymore, because there's disparity in weather pattern. So they don't know when the rain is coming, and sometimes when the rain comes, is so much that it floods the whole area and destroy whatever it is that they are doing. And then sometimes when the rain is even meant to come, like they don't see any rain at all, and maybe they've already started cultivating, and the scorching sun will go ahead to destroy whatever seedlings they put into the earth. So these are all challenges that people are facing, farmers are facing in terms of food system. So yeah, it also says that Katsina State reported a loss of 1,754,000 metric tons of grains to drought, which is caused by climate change. Next slide, please. The other sector we'll be looking at, under governance sector we'll be looking at, is insecurity. So I've talked briefly about this. Next slide, please. Sorry. Okay, yes, insecurity. So I've talked briefly about this. So the scarce resources as a result of climate change impacts. So the flooding, the drought, and all that results to scarce resources. It leads to migration, leads to scramble for limited resources and conflicts. So I gave an example of the farmer herders clashing, the herders in the north coming down due to desertification or drought. They can't find any arable land to feed their cattle, so they come down for looking for grain lands to feed their cattle. And most of the times, you know, they are not really, they end up entering into farmlands and destroying these farmlands, their cattle and all that. And what happens, like you've labored for this and someone just brings in cattle and destroys it. It results to conflict. And most of the times it results to death. So, and also you have cases of displacement of persons. So most people that have maybe their livelihood in agriculture or whatever livelihood it is that is being impacted by climate change, they decide to migrate from wherever it is they are to a different city. And when they go to this city, you see there is result to overpopulation, for example, Lagos State, and the rate of crime there is very alarming. So these are all issues of climate change. Most villages, for example, my own village, I know when I go to my villages, you hear people talking about migrating. They say, okay, the lands are not yielding fruits again. I cannot stay here. It's really frustrating. I need to go to better cities to get greener pastures. And they end up going to this overpopulated, oversaturated city and end up fighting each other. Like there's so much conflict occurring as a result of this problem. And then moving on, we have climate change and healthcare. So according to the Nigerian Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the cholera outbreak in Nigeria shows a 500%, sorry. Okay, a 500% in reported cases of cholera from June 2022. So basically, it's trying to say that there's an increase in reported cases of cholera. So remember, we said flooding enters into fresh water, and when floods occur, it carries with it all sorts of deaths, diseases, and the rest, and then enters into fresh water that people consume. And what happens? It leads to diseases like cholera and the rest. And then you also have issues of meningitis, like I also said. The heat waves in some northern states is so severe that people cannot really adjust again. Even sometimes you see people that complain that when the AC is on, they still feel so hot and they're wondering what is really happening. So these are cases of how climate change also affects healthcare, how it affects our health as well. So moving on. So this is an explainer video. I'm so sorry that this can't be played. So this is an old man in a community in Anambra State. He was complaining about how gully erosion has swept across his community and destroyed a whole lot of like farmland, ancestral homes, people's livelihood. And in most cases, when you go to these villages, the only people that you see are just the elderly. Most of the youths have left because there's nothing there for them. So the climate change impact, all these disasters has just made things so difficult for them that they can't get a means of livelihood in this community. So the best thing for them is to migrate to other parts of the country. And then moving on, we'll see how climate change affects infrastructure. So the extreme weather condition can devastate infrastructure such as road, buildings, and homes. So climate change basically destroys a whole lot of infrastructures. When governments build roads or you build hospitals in areas that are susceptible to gully erosion or floodings and the rest. So when all these things occurs, it destroys all these infrastructures. So this is how climate change actually affects infrastructures, and it leads to a whole lot of displacement. People are displaced as a result of these challenges. And then we also have climate change and the vulnerable. So women and children are the most vulnerable when it comes to climate change impact because, like for instance, women are they're naturally very open to nurturing. Okay, they are nurturers actually. So they have their children to care about, they have the elderly to care about. So most of the time when this natural disaster occurs, you see men can easily just spring up and disappear. But then women actually think about a whole lot of things. They think about, oh, okay, my dad is here and he's elderly. My mom is here, she's elderly. My children are here and they have short legs, they can't run. So I have to be there to protect them and all that. And most cases, you see that the floodings could come and carry away the women, and the men survive in these cases. And also, women are the ones in charge of cooking in their household. So when these resources are limited or flood comes and destroys a whole lot of things, they find it difficult to get the resources they need to cook at home. And also young girls. So for instance, in rural communities, you see young girls that are dropping out of school or maybe leaving school because they have to go to the bushes to get wood to cook and all that. And most of the time, they end up being molested or being raped and all sorts of abuse on them. And also this picture right here from the Resilient Aid and Dialogue Initiative is an IDP camp. If you can notice, can anybody just share with me what they notice about this picture? Like just looking at it. What's the first thing that strikes you when you look at this picture? Okay, women and children. A lot of women and children are present. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that drives home exactly what I'm trying to say. So you see more of women than men in IDP camps. And you know what happens in IDP camps? There are lots of them in Abuja here, as I am. And when you visit these IDP camps, the way, the environments, their means of living is really devastating. Like it's not something to write home about. It's not somewhere that you would love to be. So these people are left vulnerable to so many abuses and the rest. And most of these people in IDP camps, they are here because their homes have been destroyed as a result of this climate change effects. So it just shows that women are more vulnerable, children are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Therefore, it's very important to carry them along in our discussion, like when we are trying to fight against climate change and all that, we should also include women into the discussion and help them to also be climate actors as well, and also children. And that is why we also advocate for catching them at a young age. So it's important also to introduce climate education to children at that in school levels, to let them know that this can affect you. This is affecting children like you in some communities. And then you can actually do something to address these issues. So okay, so before I hand over to my colleague, I'm really sorry that I've taken so much time. So I will just throw a question out there. I'll throw a question out there. So after the whole session, you can easily unmute to answer, or you can put it on the chat box, that's fine. So as a climate advocate working in the private sector to drive climate action, I can assist the people of Ayetoro community. Remember the community I spoke about earlier, through awareness and sensitization programs, get towards equipping them with the knowledge they require to adapt to the environmental challenge that they are currently facing. And I can also use social media as a tool to make the outside world and governments aware of their calamities and convince them to buy into supporting the interventions that I'm looking to drive. So how would you assist them in resolving their problems as a future government official? So I know most of you here have an ambition of going into political spaces, become policy makers and the rest. So you as a future government official, how do you think you can help them to solve this problem that they are currently facing? So you can think about it at the end of the session, we'll come back to it. So thank you very much for listening to me, and over to you, Samuel.
Thank you so much, Kachi, for that. So from my end, so what I'll just be doing basically is I will continue for where Kachi stopped, and I will be focusing more on the policy angle and looking at the federal government's response to climate change issues in Nigeria. So looking at this picture here, you will see that the president, that's President Muhammadu Buhari, accompanied by some ministers and other officials. When the president signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, and in 2017, the Paris Agreement was actually ratified by the Nigerian government. So it's important for us to also understand that, so far, Nigeria has been able to come up with a lot of policies in an attempt to, ensure that we mitigate the impact of climate change in our country. Yeah, because when you talk about climate change issues in Nigeria, it actually means different things to different communities. When you look at, let's say, some part in Southwest, you'll notice that some of them are actually, experiencing serious flooding. And when you look at some parts in the North, you notice that some of them are actually experiencing, insecurity issues that are connected to climate change. And, you also talk about, the shrinking of Lake Chad, and, how it is actually helping people, how it is fueling people's migration into Maiduguri. Farmers who can no longer, fishermen who can no longer, catch fish again are now, being recruited by, Boko Haram to engage in insurgency, in the other part of Nigeria. So basically, when you look at climate change issues, it means different things for different communities. And so that is why it is important that we look at, the response that has been made by the federal government to, tackle the issue of climate change in Nigeria. So one of the response, is the National Adaptation Strategy and Plan of Action on Climate Change for Nigeria. It was actually, came into existence in 2011, and the policy basically was put aside to ensure that Nigeria is able to reduce our vulnerability to the negative impact of climate change. Yeah, so also, I think I've spoken about the ratification of Paris Agreement in 2017. So we also need to look at other efforts that are being championed by the government to ensure that we reduce greenhouse gas emission to a minimum level. And when you're talking about greenhouse gas emission, then you talk about the nationally determined contribution, that was updated, some years ago, to ensure that Nigeria is able to achieve greenhouse gas emission by 20% unconditionally and 47%, conditionally, looking at financial and technological transfer from developed economies by 2030. Next slide, please. So another important thing that has actually happened, since 2021, when the presidents at COP26 in Glasgow in UK, actually made commitment that Nigeria is going to cut its carbon emission to net zero by 2060. And so since the declaration by the president in UK, Nigeria has actually, been able to come up with different policies and a lot of works to ensure that this a declaration comes to pass. So what has been done so far is that in 2021, the Nigerian government, that's like barely, I think 1 week after the COP26, the Nigerian government actually signed the climate change law. And the essence of the climate change law is, is to actually have a comprehensive, policy on climate change in Nigeria, looking at how we can, mitigate, the effect of climate change, and looking at, other key, developmental issues that are connected to climate change, and how Nigeria can actually, provide solutions to some of the issues that we are battling in different communities, across the country. So when the climate change law was signed, was signed by the president. There was a part for the formation of what we call National Council on Climate Change. And the National Council on Climate Change is actually chaired by the president, and it's headed by the pioneering Director General in person of Dr. Salisu Dairu. I think just recently, the federal government actually merged the Office of National Council on Climate Change with the Energy Transition Office together to ensure that they are able to help Nigeria achieve the net zero targets by 2060. A lot of things has happened, and all these efforts are geared towards ensuring that Nigeria is able to take a strategic place when it comes to tackling the effect of climate change in the country. So another important policy we also need to talk about is the launch of the Energy Transition Plan in 2022. It was launched last year. And the aim of the plan actually is to ensure that Nigeria is able to achieve a carbon neutrality, ending energy poverty, and also driving energy growth. So when you look at the plan, basically, you will realize that the plan has about 5 key focus areas. We talk about power, we talk about cooking, we talk about oil and gas, we talk about transport and industry. And these 5 key sectors, actually, contribute about 65% of Nigeria's greenhouse emission. And so the plan is that Nigeria is going to be able to achieve carbon neutrality in each of these sectors, to ensure that we're able to tie to our net zero commitment for 2060. And most importantly, the Vice President in person of VP Yemi Osinbajo also declared that Nigeria is going to need about 1.9 trillion US dollars to actually achieve the energy transition by 2060. So, and a lot of effort is currently ongoing to ensure that the country is able to get the funding and the finance that is needed to actually drive energy transition. Because when we talk about all these policies being created, it is one thing to create policy, it's another thing to be able to implement policy. And when you're talking about implementing policies, we need to look at what are the key things that are involved in implementing policies. Looking at the technical aspects, looking at also the financial aspect, which is very important, because if we're saying that Nigeria is going to transition from fossil fuel, to net zero economy, we also need to consider, what are the challenges that we are likely to face. Because when you look at Nigeria as a country, Nigeria solely relies on oil and gas to power our economy. And so it's not going to be easy to say we want to transition. So when we're talking about transitioning to net zero economy, then we also need to look at what are the possible challenges that might arise from that, and how do we tackle those challenges to ensure that we don't leave anybody behind in our quest to transition to a net zero economy in Nigeria. So basically, Nigeria is just running a vision to ensure that we're able to achieve a low carbon climate resilience. So that's like the vision that Nigeria is running with. So next slide, please. Okay. So now looking at the transition to a green economy, so we want to talk about the National Development Plan. It's actually a framework for green transition. So I don't know if we're actually aware about the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan that was actually for 2017 to 2020. That was actually set by the current president. So as a result of that plan, Nigeria was able to come up with what we have as NDP, which is supposed to run from 2021 to 2025, and is supposed to guide our framework to transition to a net zero economy. So since Nigeria launched the NDP plan, a lot of things have actually been put in place. For instance, we have witnessed initiatives such as the Nigeria Circular Economy Working Group. The Nigeria Circular Economy Working Group was actually created by AFDB, that's African Development Bank, in partnership with the federal government of Nigeria, Ministry of Environment, and some other key stakeholders, to ensure that Nigeria is able to, transition to a sustainable and inclusive green growth by 2030, looking at the medium term, and also by 2050, looking at the long term. So we're talking about here, how we can ensure that Nigeria is able to move from a linear economy model. When you talk about linear economy model, you're talking about a model where, where we're talking about single-use plastic, where, consumption is just question of products, it's just based on, single use. But now we are saying that how do we move from, single-use products to actually, a more circular economy, like a more sustainable, product use that can be reused, that can be recycled, in a bit to ensure that, we grow our economy, and at the same time, we cause less harm to people in society. So at Clean Technology Hub, we are making a lot of efforts. We are leading advocacy, research, and we are incubating green enterprises, and ideas to ensure that we also key into this green economy. So for our circular economy project, what we're doing at the moment is that we are actually developing a policy brief for circular economy, to also help with transitioning from a linear economy to circular economy, so that citizens can understand what are the key things they need to know when it comes to circular economy, and how they can also help us to achieve the drive for circular economy in Nigeria. And also at ETH, we are also working with a lot of partners. We're working with Circular Economy Innovation Partnership, that's CEIP, to also ensure that we're able to come up with this policy brief that would help to achieve circular economy in Nigeria. So now, next slide, please. Okay. So now, looking at Nigeria's green transition, it's also important that we talk about clean energy. My colleague Kachi has been able to, talk about, climate change, and she has been able to, break some key terms, and keywords down to us so that we can be able to understand very well. So when you hear clean energy in Nigeria, we're talking about a renewable form of energy, that is not fossil fuel in nature, a renewable form of energy that actually helps us reduce our greenhouse gas emission in Nigeria. So currently, in Nigeria, there's an agency called Rural Electrification Agency, REA, and so what they're doing is that they're actually driving in off-grid rural electrification, because when you talk about energy access in Nigeria, you will get to understand that a lot of people in rural areas are actually facing energy poverty, and this energy poverty is actually affecting is affecting their lives, is affecting a lot of things. We have cases of how energy access, energy poverty is actually affecting the health sector, in the sense that some women during child labor, they are unable to, they don't have access to lights, that would help them. Also, some of the materials and all that is needed to be used, some of them, they are supposed to be powered by lights, it's also not functioning properly as a result of energy poverty gap that we are experiencing in Nigeria. So the REA is actually doing a lot, to ensure that rural areas in Nigeria are able to experience electrification, and that's evidence through Nigeria Electrification Project, NEP, and also the Solar Power Nigeria project that is targeting 5 million new solar connections by 2023 for rural areas across Nigeria. So another important aspect when we talk about green transition is transportation. That you will agree with me that the transportation sector in Nigeria actually contributes a lot to greenhouse gas emission. And so when you talk about transportation sector, we're talking about all these combustion vehicles that are being used that actually emit smoke, and some of these smokes are harmful to the environment and to society. So we are looking at how can we transition from using combustion powered vehicles to green transportation, so that we can be able to ensure that we reduce greenhouse gas emission and also plug into the net zero target that has been set by the president during COP26 26. So, and we have a lot of initiatives in Nigeria, who are coming to national spotlight. For instance, I think maybe last year, one Mustafa, Gajibo, was able to launch an electric bus that was operational in Maiduguri. Just recently, the Lagos state government, in partnership with Oando, released some electric vehicles, buses, just to also plug into the green transportation that we're trying to look out in Nigeria. And we also need more people, more stakeholders to also join the quest to ensure that we're able to transition from a fossil fuel-based transportation to a green transportation that will cause less harm to the society. Now, looking at agriculture, then we're also talking about, how can we practice agriculture in a sustainable way to ensure that, agriculture does not contribute a lot to also greenhouse gas emission. Because when you even look at, let's talk about the, I think when you look at meat, like you talk about, how in abattoirs, how they kill cows and all. So research has shown that, all those abattoirs that we have and how they kill those cows, they also actually contribute high to greenhouse gas emission. And so now we're looking at how can we, engage, in a smart agricultural process to ensure that we contribute less harm to our society. Because when we're talking about responding to the climate change impact in Nigeria, it is a collective effort that you and I have to be involved in, and we also need to ensure that we're able to come up with innovative policies to mitigate the effect of climate change in Nigeria. Next slide, please. So for clean cooking, you also agree with me that a lot of people in Africa and specifically in Nigeria, actually use the traditional method of cooking. That's, we're talking about the use of kerosene, firewood, and charcoal. And you get to understand that when it comes to vulnerability of climate change in a society, you get to understand that women and children are actually more vulnerable, as a result of, how some of them actually, engage in some, house chores, like, they engage in cooking, and some of them, cook with kerosene, firewood, and coal. And, this firewood and coal that they use, is actually causing harm to the environment. And at the same time, it's also altering their health. And, so it's important that we are also able to transition to a clean cooking method where, people are able to access clean cooking stoves so as to also reduce greenhouse gas emission that comes from cooking. Waste management. So in 2021, the federal government actually approved a plastic waste management policy. And recently at School Technology Hub, we're able to actually summarize the national policy on plastic waste management. And the reason why we did it was because we wanted to simplify the whole policy document so that citizens can be able to understand the nitty-gritty of these policy documents. And now they can also join the efforts of ensuring that we reduce plastic waste in the society. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges? What are the challenges that has been faced so far in Nigeria's effort to respond to climate change issues? Now we talk about loss and damages. And when you talk about that, we also need to consider the fact that a lot of communities are actually vulnerable to the impact of climate change in a society. So how do we ensure that communities, who have severely experienced, is it flooding? Let's use the case study of the flooding that happened recently in Ayetoro community, where there is a sort of sea incursion from the Atlantic Ocean, sweeping houses and sweeping community, in Ayetoro, affecting their source of livelihood, because some of them were actually involved in fishing, and because of the recent incursion of sea level rise in the community, it's actually affecting their source of livelihood, and at the same time it's also displacing some of the people in the community, and also some of the children, who have become displaced can no longer go to school because of what has happened to them, and they are looking for how they can actually, come out from all the issues associated, with the impact of climate change. So we also need to talk, about how to ensure that, how do we ensure that those people who are actually at the forefront, of climate vulnerability, how do we ensure that we are able to mitigate the impact and the effect of what they are experiencing, and how can the government and key stakeholders also be of support, to provide support to them to mitigate the effect of what they have experienced. Now, in the inadequate insurance cover. So when you talk about insurance in Nigeria, you get to understand that it is only the elite in society, people who are educated, well exposed, that actually understand what it means to actually maybe insure their lives, insure their cars, insure their houses and other properties. So what happens to rural women, women in local communities who don't even have any knowledge about insuring? So when they experience the effect of climate change, how do we ensure that they are able to come out from it strong? Because when you look at a lot of IDP in India, you realize that a lot of people are actually, they've become displaced just as a result of insecurity and climate change connected issues that are actually affecting them. So how do we ensure that these people are well educated to ensure that some of their properties are insured, and so that when disasters happen, they can be able to come back again to their feet? Then we'll talk about poor awareness. You also agree with me that the level of climate change awareness in Nigeria is still growing. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people in rural communities who still don't understand the concept of climate change, who still don't believe in climate change, and they feel that what is happening in their society is not actually connected to climate change issues. So it's just recently that people are now beginning to get more educated, and they are beginning to get more exposed. Even with the last year flooding that happened in like about 33 state provinces in Nigeria plus FCT, it also made people to understand that climate change issue is actually real, and we all have to come together to ensure that we actually promote climate action so as to reduce the effects of climate change in our society. Next slide, please. Okay. So we'll be having a short tax. So I will just tell us about the tax, and we all can drop our ideas and suggestions on that. So what will you do differently as an individual and as a person occupying any position to protect the environment? So what do you think you can do differently as an individual? Or do you think that the government is actually doing enough to mitigate the effect of climate change in the society? Considering all these policies that are spoken about, that the government have actually put in place to ensure that Nigeria is able to drive climate action and achieve the net zero economy by 2060. So what do you think you are going to do differently as, let's say if you are elected into a position? So what are you going to do to actually provide the environment? So you can drop your responses in the chat box, and let's have an idea of what you are going to do differently to ensure. Next slide, please. Okay. So recommendation. So from all we've said, we've been saying since morning, from what my colleague, has been able to, share with us, and from what I've been able to also say, you get to understand that climate change is real, and we need to, all work together to ensure that we, tackle the impact of climate change in our society. And when you talk about tackling, climate, change issues, we need to talk about how our societies can be able to come up with innovative solutions on how they can actually respond to the climate change issues in their community. Because like I said earlier, climate change issues actually means different things for different communities. So what applies in let's say in Osun State as the climate change issues might be different from what will be applicable, let's say in Borno, for instance. So that shows that at society level, community level, people need to be able to stand up to actually come up with solutions on how they can actually tackle the effect of climate change in their community based on what they are experiencing. So our recommendation is that there's a need for the government to domesticate the climate change law. Like I said earlier, the Climate Change Act was passed in 2021, and so it's still a national policy. So there's still work to be done in the sense that at the, let's say, state government level, at the local government level, we need to ensure that this climate change policy is being domesticated to ensure that these policies can also be developed at the state level, considering the parameters of the structure of the state, looking at the local government levels and looking at their peculiarity on how to ensure that each state is able to come up with a climate change policies. Though I know some states in Nigeria are already doing that. I know Lagos is doing something around that area, in domesticating the climate change law. So a lot needs to be done to ensure that we also carry everybody along. Yeah, when we're talking about transitioning to a net zero economy, we also have to consider that we cannot afford to leave anybody behind. Now, we cannot talk about telling people that, okay, we want them to to use green clean cooking, and the question now should be that, okay, fine, is clean cooking actually affordable? Is it available? Is it accessible for people in rural community? Because we cannot be saying that, okay, we want to champion clean energy in Nigeria, and focusing on one segment of society and leaving the other one behind. So when we talk about energy transition in Nigeria at large, we need to ensure that we do not leave anyone behind. Everybody has to be carried along this process to ensure that people who are going to lose their job, what's the plan to ensure that they are going to get other jobs, so that they will not become jobless and later on become later on start disturbing the society because they've lost their job. So a lot of things has to be considered to ensure that we don't leave anyone behind in our quest to transition to a net zero economy. So we also need to talk about increased climate finance. So when I was talking about the energy transition plan, the VP actually said that it's going to cost Nigeria about $1.9 billion US to actually $1.9 billion US trillion to actually transition to a net zero economy by 2060. That money is actually a lot of money. So now the question is, what can we do to also ensure that the country is able to have access to funding and finance to fund all these policies that the government is coming up with, to also ensure that we do not leave anyone behind in our quest to transition to a net zero economy. We also need to talk about commitment to loss and damages. Just like my colleague said, that in the last COP 20 in the last COP, that was last year, COP 27 in Egypt, they actually emphasize on loss and damages on how to ensure that people who are vulnerable to the impact of climate change are able, to have access to some form of support so that they can be able to, come out from their situation. So the government has to do a lot of work to also ensure that, people who are most vulnerable to climate change impact are also able to access the necessary things they need to come out of, the challenges they are actually experiencing in their community. And lastly, we also need to talk about, how to ensure that the government is able to implement the climate change law. Now, one of the issues I've realized we have in Nigeria is that, we have policies here and there, but implementation is the main problem. So how do we, ensure that all these policies we have been able to create, they are nice policies. How do we ensure that they are being implemented properly so as to address the issue of climate change in our society? And this this is something that as political leaders, as stakeholders in different groups, this is something that you could also be able to look at how to ensure that your community is also able to, fully implement the climate change law to ensure that it is being domesticated at the local level. Yeah, because we have a national policy in place, and we need to also work to ensure that these policies are domesticated at the local level. So let's go back to the task that was given earlier. So what will you do differently as an individual, occupying a position to protect the environment, from some of these things we have been able to talk about? Okay, so I think I can see some responses. So I think Victor Balogun said mainstream climate action through briquettes utilization. Okay, thank you for that. Silas Agado, as an elected official, I think more sensitization of citizens about the effect of climate on both our environment and humanity. This will help citizens adopt better life practices that will reduce the issues of climate change. Practices such as indiscriminate defecation and use of firewood for cooking. Also, indiscriminate dumping of refuse and absence of recycling systems in our communities. So thank you all. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kachi to close this section. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for your active participation. I love the fact that as we are throwing out questions, people are answering, and the conversation is just going very well. So thank you so much for your active participation. And if you want to share any key takeaways from this session, please feel free to do so. So over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, we have Aisha's hand is up. I don't know whether we have a question. Aisha, do you have a question?
Hi, good evening. Just want to say well done to Kachi and Samuel. Great job. And thank you very much for doing this. Well done.
Oh, thank you very much, Ms. Aisha. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have any questions? Okay, Fatima Danlami has a question. Fatima, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for the wonderful presentation to the both facilitators. I really enjoyed today's class because it's something that I have passion for. So my question is, for someone that is really starting, to create awareness on climate change and people to become ecologically conscious, like what is the first step for someone that has to do things for the community to make them aware on the need for the tree planting and unnecessary deforestation and all? I want to know the ways for someone to become active in that.
Okay, can I take that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Fatima. I think the step you're taking now is the first step. The fact that you are already passionate about the environment and then you want to take climate action, and then you're trying to learn what is needed to become a climate actor as well. So that is a a beautiful first step. And then another thing I'll recommend is volunteering. So volunteering will go a long way to help you to really understand the sector better and what you need to do. And talking about volunteering, we have a volunteer network at Clean Technology Hub, where you get to, participate actively and, carry out different climate actions. We have cleanup campaigns. You have different projects like the tree plantings that you're talking about. So you can check out our website. Should I go ahead to call the website? I hope that's fine.
Yes, ma. Yes, ma.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So www.cleantechnologyhub.com. So check our website, you see where to volunteer with us. So that is another step you can take.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I've asked Victor to unmute. This is the only second question that we have. Hello, Victor. Can you speak? It seems like the baby wants to ask the question.
Apologies, please, my background. Yeah, I just want to ask a question. How can we ensure that our governments make big polluters pay? Because you agree with me that big polluters have exposed Africa to a whole lot of issues. And when the issue of big polluters come to the front line, and particularly in the last COP27, see that they don't really address it headlong. So how can we as civil society people and citizens ensure that our governments hold big polluters accountable for what they've caused, the harm they've caused in Africa and maybe Nigeria in particular? Thank you.
Samuel, would you like to take that?
Please, can you come again with your question? I was checking, I think the other question that was it on a group when we're asking a question.
Yeah, I was asking that how can we make big polluters pay? How can we ensure that our governments hold big polluters liable for all the harm they've caused in Africa and Nigeria in particular?
Okay, thank you for that. I think when you talk about big polluters, I know you're talking about let's say companies who are actually involved in generating greenhouse gas emission. Like you can talk about let's say maybe oil and gas company, who are actually burning fossil fuel in the southern part of Nigeria, and how this process is actually causing harm to the environment and all. So when you actually look at that, you understand that the government is actually trying their best to actually tackle that issue, because I know that I think recently a company in Benue State precisely was actually closed down by the government, and it was because I think the company was actually releasing toxic substances into a water stream, in a particular community, and the federal government had to swing into action to actually close down the company, so as to ensure that the water that is being polluted, for the people to use, because people rely on the water to cook, to wash, to drink and all, and companies are actually the companies are actually polluting the water. So the government had to swing into action to close down the company, and I think later on they were able to address the situation to ensure that that company does not actually release toxic substances into the water source of the community. So I understand that a lot still has to be done from the policy angle to ensure that I understand the fact that in Nigeria basically we have policies and all that address different situation when it comes to all these pollution, but the issue has always been about implementation. So there's a need to also encourage citizens. There's a need to encourage companies to ensure that they don't engage in all these releasing of harmful substances into society. And so it's just like creating a sort of parley, like between the government, companies, community stakeholders, to ensure that we're able to minimize the impact of some of these pollutants that are being released to our society, so as to ensure that our people become safe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Aisha, I think you want to touch on this.
Yes, quickly to add on what government is doing. First of all, at COP27, the president of Nigeria and other African leaders wrote very strong worded letters and had very strong presentation on their position on loss and damage. Because there's been a lot of eye service towards loss and damage. We do not do a lot of the damage to the environment as Africans, but we face the worst effects of climate change, like the flooding of 2022. And secondly, the climate change bill has provision for carbon tax and carbon budget. What do you mean by carbon budget? Sorry, hold on. Sorry. So carbon budget means that there's a budget for every organization, private and public sector, on the kind of emissions that they are required to contribute, that they are allowed to pass in a year. And that budget is going to be reduced year in, year out as most companies embrace sustainability. So that is what is in the climate law. What we are doing now is advocacy, but in a few years, by next year, it will now become implementation. So if these companies do not surpass their carbon budgets for the year, they will have to pay a carbon tax. And that is part of what is going to go into funding the loss and damage to rural and low-income farmers. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you so much, Aisha. We will take Benjamin. We'll have 3 more questions. These questions just popped up. I'm sure they are follow-ups from the questions that have been asked. So let's take Benjamin.
All right. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello. Good evening. Can you hear me? Sorry, can anyone hear me, please?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Good evening. My name is Benjamin Aaron. A quick one, either for Aisha or Samuel. What would you say is our achievements, successes? I mean, Nigerian successes in terms of what we call climate engineering. Did you get a question, please? Hello?
Yes, I had the question. I'm not sure if Kachi or Samuel got. Can you repeat it, please?
Okay, yeah, I was asking what are our successes? I mean, Nigerians' successes in as regards to climate engineering, what we call geoengineering.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Onyekachi, Samuel, do you want us to take the other questions? Our facilitators, okay.
Can we take all the questions together so we can just answer them
all at once. Okay. All right. Samuel, please go ahead. Samuel,
good evening. So my question is, I want to ask, because I realized that more focus have always been placed on the aspects of green gas emission in climate change matters. But like Samuel earlier mentioned, he said the sensitization of the public about the indiscriminate dumping of refuse that clog up all these waterways and the likes, causing flooding and the like. But because of our state of development in Nigeria, I realize that it will be difficult for the government, or probably the government, to effectively, at this point of our time, to be able to effectively control or probably sensitize the public enough to be able to know how to dispose their waste. But I want to ask, is there any policy that the government has put in place whereby they can enforce some the companies, the manufacturing companies, to replace all these plastic packaging with biodegradable materials, that even if it is indiscriminately dumped into the environment, after a while we can be sure that it will degrade, not like all these nylons and plastics that are being used. Thank you.
Okay, great question. And then we'll take the last one, Cynthia. Cynthia, I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, hi everyone. Good evening. Well done to the speakers for all that they've shared today. I think my question is slightly related to the previous question, and it's about the efforts that the government is making on waste management and sensitization, because the conversation around climate change is almost as though we are trying to fly before we even crawl. And even though the policies on climate change, of course, we have to keep up with, the SDGs and the expectations from the global community, there are still the very primary activities that we need to do, even in Nigeria, within our communities, on waste management, on the ensuring that there are refuse bins, on how to dispose of the different types of household waste or industrial waste that we still don't know. So if those things are not addressed, trying to address carbon emissions is almost like a tall order, and it's almost like we are just going to be going around in circles like hamsters on a wheel and not achieve much, but just, meeting what I would call quotas or just trying to tick boxes. So it's the same question, and also a charge to, civil societies handling these areas to really do much about the little things first before we start to jump on, this climate change conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Cynthia. So when you say the civil societies need to do more to raise awareness, right? Before we start talking about policies, maybe making policies or implementing policies, like what more do you expect civil societies to do apart from maybe raising awareness, sensitization, advocacy? Is there something you want to share with us? Hello? I don't know if Cynthia heard me.
Okay. Okay. I think before Cynthia.
Okay, I couldn't unmute.
Okay.
So the conversation, hello? I couldn't unmute initially. So the conversation around civil societies doing more is not so much that they are not doing enough. It's just that I think that we need to, it's almost like trying to, it's like trying to, the low-hanging fruits, trying to address the low-hanging fruits first, which is basically, even within communities. I'll give you an example. Where I live, we have the environmental officer, so the women that sweep the streets. When their supervisors are not looking, they are sweeping the streets into the gutters. So amongst us in the communities, there is still such a depth of understanding of how to manage the environment that, yes, we are committing billions and millions of dollars into climate change policies and climate change actions, but there's so much that can be done, even starting from the grassroots, like I talked about the refuse bins, like I talked about sensitization of those that work in environment. A lot of them have no clue. I mean, they're doing it for a pay, but they have no understanding of why they do it or what they're doing. Even the waste management officers have no idea or understanding of what they're doing. And before these Western countries moved from, waste management and environmental sanitation to climate change, they went through this process, but we are flying. We haven't gone through the basics. Even within us, we still have people who would toss things out of their cars. So if we're tossing things out of their cars, what are we talking about climate change about? That's what I'm saying. So I'm just saying that, yes, there should be the overall and holistic goal of climate change, but we need to start putting a lot of efforts and focus on those small things around us and within the environment that we live in. And it has to, I'm not even talking about urban city dwellers, I'm talking about the rural communities. They need to know those things first, or else, well, trying to address floods will be almost like trying to put water in a basket.
Okay, I understand fully well, and I do agree with you though. So we need to have like a bottom-up approach. That is really important though. So starting from the grassroots level, and I'm very certain that lots of civil society organizations are currently doing that. Lots of private organizations are also doing that, like trying to raise the awareness. And then talking about this is like a behavioral change we are trying to incur. Like we're trying to tell people, okay, what you're doing has a negative impact on the environment. And it's really alarming because I know I've been in buses, or maybe I'm walking on the road and then I see people or in a vehicle or something, and people just easily throw things outside. And in my mind, being conscious of all of this, that I'll just say, why would this person do this? Like, how is this person's reasoning? Like, why is this person doing such things? So maybe I'll assume that they are supposed to know this, but now I understand fully well that it's not everybody that is aware that these little things that they do actually contribute to the lot of waste that we see in our cities and all that. So I agree with you. Definitely, civil society organization has a part to play, but then the government also needs to support with this, because if you are going to the grassroots to sensitize people, we also need the government to join in and work together, work with us to help us to reach all these last mile communities, and also provide us with the resources that we also need to reach these last mile communities and sensitize them as much as we can. So it's a joint collaborative effort between government and also civil society organizations. So if you just leave it and say, okay, civil society organizations are not doing much, I mean, we've been doing the advocacy ever since, but there are few of us, so we can't cover all grounds. So we need the government to come in and help us to reach as much communities as possible, sensitize people and help them to know the way forward and all that. So it should be a collaborative function of both civil societies and also government. Thank you.
Thank you, Kachi. To address Mr. Benjamin's question, talking about climate engineering, looking at the sources and failure, I will be very sincere. I don't think Nigeria is actually doing enough in the area of climate engineering. Yeah, because when we talk about innovative solutions, towards tackling climate change issues in Nigeria, this is where climate engineering comes in to ensure that we're able to come up with innovative ideas. I think last year I was in Berlin and I visited I can't really remember I think maybe a production site for electric vehicles and one other engineering project like that is being done by the federal government, and I was actually surprised to see that these people are actually investing in technological activities to actually drive the climate action in their country. But when you look at Africa as a continent, we are still battling with some issues that, that it's not actually helping us to, come up with some of these innovations, when it comes to, engineering, innovations and all to actually, drive the climate change efforts in Nigeria. So a lot still has to be done by the government, though climate engineering is still like a growing, should I say, field or topic in Nigeria. It's not really, that's a big thing, but a lot still has to be done to ensure that, Nigeria is able to tap into technology to, fight climate change or, to mitigate the impact of climate change in our society. So that's what I would say as regards that. So then the other question about, the policy aspects on plastic waste management. Yeah, like I said, we have policies in place. Nigeria actually has a lot of policies that are actually in place to tackle plastic waste management. I know of the national policy on plastic waste management. I think that one was done in 2020. And currently, UNIDO is working with the federal government of Nigeria, to also come up with a circular economy model on how Nigeria can transition from a linear economy to a circular economy. I'm also aware about I'm aware of what Africa Development Bank is doing in partnership with the federal government and other key stakeholders to also ensure that Nigeria is able to come up with a circular economic standalone policy that will actually, drive our, efforts towards transitioning to a net zero economy by 2060. So a lot of policies are in place, if I would say, and some they are still developing some, but the major challenge is implementation. So that is why, as young leaders, we also have a role to play to ensure that some of these policies, become available in our local community. We also have a role to play to ensure that we sensitize our people in our community, in our immediate environment, so they can become aware about all these policies and also know the role they have to play when it comes to mitigating the impact of climate change in our society. So I would say some of these policies are actually in place, like I said, but the challenge so far has just been implement some of these policies. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay.
Sorry, there's a question from Moses. He's asking, most Nigerians still find discussions around climate change alien. How can we make it more attractive and make it feel more urgent? Talking about being attractive, I don't think you could actually say you'd make climate change topic attractive. Urgent, definitely, because we need to take action immediately. If we don't take actions, sorry?
No, I was asking if you would like to take that, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I've been speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Okay, yes. I was looking at the word attractive. So I wouldn't say climate change discussion should be attractive. Urgent, definitely. Is an urgent something we need to take. There's the urgent need to take action this moment because the situation keeps worsening. We have so many environmental challenges that we're currently facing. So I believe from this session, like we've talked about the effects of climate change, you talked about the heat waves, you talk about the floodings, you talk about the droughts, desertifications and all this. So these are things that you see every day. So when you tell these people, okay, most of the times they are not aware that these impacts of climate change, these impacts are a result of climate change. But when you explain it to them, they will understand better and they will know that they are also contributing to these challenges and they themselves can also contribute to lessening the impacts of climate change. So it's actually their situation. It's not something that you paint as attractive. Maybe I could call it like a doomy situation because that is what it is. So it's very important that people take urgent actions, that everybody works together to make sure that we can mitigate and adapt to climate change effects.
Yeah, thank you, Kachi. I think to also respond to the question, as a media person, the word attractive, maybe he's trying to say, how can we communicate, climate change, properly or effectively to people to understand. So I think I also understand that as a communication person that, there are ways that we can tell climate change stories in effective ways to ensure that people are really able to, understand and grasp the whole idea around these climate change issues. For children, it could mean that, okay, let's say coming up with non-fiction stories, that are related to climate change, where, you can use all these, artwork to actually depict, the effect of climate change so that children can also understand the topic better. It could also mean for adults, maybe coming up with, with pictures, with videos that will also help citizens to actually understand the need for them to take action and, an urgent need to actually tackle the effect of climate change in our society. So, yeah, we can also, also, I think the whole point rather is to ensure that, telling the climate change story is more compelling and attractive, so people can be able to easily understand, the impact of climate change and how they can also join the effort towards, mitigating and adapting to the impacts in the society.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. We have spent almost 2 hours. If we were given the permission, we'll probably go on to keep asking questions, but I guess we have exhausted our time, and we would like to say thank you so much to the Clean Technology Hub crew. Thank you, Ekachi. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Aisha, for being here and for sharing your knowledge and insights, and for also engaging the cohort in a very meaningful discussion. We say thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules, I must imagine. So I would like members of the cohort, for those of us still yet on the call, please kindly send your thank yous and appreciations to the chat box, thanking members of this team for taking time out to share with you and I, and for engaging us in this discussion this evening. It's been very, 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 very insightful, impactful, thought-provoking, and definitely inspiring, charging us to do more, do better, start from where we are, ensure that we know and we are better citizens, even as we look forward to ensuring that our society or our nation or our climate does better. So thank you, everyone, once again. I hand over to the head of Politeracy, Lisa, if you have any announcements for the cohort, you can do that now. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. Hi, Adishola, well done. Thank you so much, Onyekachi and Samuel. This was very expansive. And I'm sure a lot of people have been so enlightened. Climate change is something we don't talk about enough. So I'm sure a lot of the students have really benefited from this class. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. It was great having you. And to all students, thank you for being in class. And your assignments will come within the week. Yeah, I think I can see Edie here. Edie, you're welcome. Do you have anything to say?
Pleasure having you all here. Your assignments will actually come in first thing tomorrow morning. I'll be giving the assignments. I think party chairman and everybody in party should be.
We cannot hear you anymore. Okay, I guess it is probably having a network challenge. All right, everyone. Please can you just unmute and tell our facilitator thank you before I end the class?
Thank you, Nkachi and Samuel. God bless you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. And we look forward to more insightful sessions.
All right. So on behalf of the Electoral College, this is saying thank you to Clean Hub Technology. It's always a pleasure having you